record this meeting for our own purposes. So that will come up shortly. Okay. Right. So today we're going to have an interesting discussion. Robert, who's going to be talking to us about some of the work that RSSB is doing in the R&D space. So without further ado, if you'd like to share your presentation, and we'll make a start.
Thank you very much, Andy. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. I'll just set up my screen. I'll be ready to go. I think as well, it will be a great opportunity to answer any questions that you have, both on research in the RSSB. I'll do my best to answer them, what's not covered. So I have about 45 minutes to speak to you today about research in general within rail, research at the RSSB, and then zooming into freight a little bit and some of the work that we're doing there by means of an example. And to probe around with it. But there's such a variety of content within research. That's why I enjoy the job so much, is that each day you get to work on so many different things. Now, of course, that means that you're not an expert in everything. So forgive me when I put up the content. What we have to do in RSSB and in the research team is to balance that need to be able to speak about things and communicate them to people. We do learn a lot and we get to see an awful lot that happens in it, but sometimes we're pretending to be experts, but we're not always really. And myself, I'm a mechatronic engineer. I studied in Ireland and then came over to the UK to do a graduate scheme on the underground with tube lines. And there I quickly got into track maintenance and spent a lot of time doing lubricators, and then got into rail grinding. Did some work on friction modifiers as well. So very familiar with the PWI, and eventually managed to get into doing innovation on the underground. And with that, I found that actually doing improvements and bringing in new technologies is a really exciting place to work. I moved to TfL for a while to work in their commercial development team to learn a bit more of the business and business development skills. And then moved to the RSSB, where I'm research and innovation account manager within the research team. So my job in a way is to be able to navigate all of the different solutions that we have so that members and the railway community can navigate and find out what's useful for them. I focus in on implementation as well, which we're going to talk about. And ultimately, research that remains on the shelf is going to be pretty pointless in the railway. It adds to a knowledge base, but if people can't reach it, understand it, and apply it, then we're not going to get a lot of value from it. So at RSSB, we're really focused on getting things used. And the other thing I do is engagement and making sure that people understand what we do and how to extract value from it. So I'll kick off now and I'll take you through some of the research parts. Okay. People may not be familiar with RSSB. There's so many acronyms. We are not the RAIB. It's so funny when you go on site, people start elbowing each other and saying, put on your high-vi and do this. We're not focused on that. The RSSB, the Rail Safety and Standards Board, and I can, whilst it is about safer, smarter rail, that's one of those condensed ones that doesn't tell you an awful lot on the background. But what we are is an independent not-for-profit group within rail. We are owned by key stakeholders we're not-for-profit and we're owned by key stakeholders. But how it came about is a little bit different. When the industry was broken up, they looked around and went, right, we're going to need somebody to hold all the industry standards. And you couldn't really trust any one organization to be 100% true all the time. So they went, oh, we're probably going to need an independent organization. So they also looked at the fact that when you break up the industry a little bit, then there can be interfaces where organizations meet. There can be cracks, and down those cracks, perhaps safety could fall. So they wanted somebody who could look at the whole of safety in rail, regardless of organizational boundaries, keep an eye on it, monitor, and flag up any issues that are rising from it. When they create an organization like this, privatization was all about making. making money for the public. And so they didn't want to have to spend money to do it. So what they decided was, do you know, this independent organization, we will get everybody who wants to run on the railway to and who needs an operating license to become a member of this organization. So in a way, that's a rough guide to how RSSB was formed. But the jobs that we do are very important. I mentioned like the core foundation is the standards. So custodian of the standards, coordinating industry to update those and to create new ones, that monitoring of safety. And with those capabilities that were there, the DFT came along and went, do you guys have the ability to undertake research? We think more research in rail would be really good. And so the research directorate was born within that. And from some of the research we did, as climate challenges were coming through, some of our research spawned the sustainability part of RSSB. So 4 key sections are listed there. Now, stakeholder-wise, and particularly for research, that wheel on the right shows all the different stakeholders that we have. Train operators, Network Rail, Roscoe's, government and industry, academia, rolling stock manufacturers, they all use and rely on our materials and the supply chain. And what RSSP tends to get is a lot of the complicated problems at the heart of the industry that we have to solve, and they tend to be quite difficult. So if we look then at how research helps in this, the research program works across safety and standards. There's a lot of symbiosis here. The program itself is funded by the DFT through a grant which they provide each year. And it comes in the caveat, it's a tripartite agreement. RSSB are there to manage it, DFT funds it, but we must work and deliver for industry at every stage. That is super important. This is not research for research's sake. It's to make improvements in the industry. So when we work with standards, we help them and they help us. But how? When it comes to standards, the committees are pulled together from representatives across industry. And there's always challenges to standards. You probably know of a few things where you wonder, why do we have to do this? It adds so much cost. It's very difficult. What's the benefit it brings? Standards are there to be challenged. They are the base level that everybody can follow. You can go beyond standards. You can do your own mitigations as long as you document it and make that case. But when those committees have to make a decision about whether they change it, sometimes they don't have all the information on a certain topic. So research can go away and find that out and then deliver that knowledge to the standards teams for them to be able to make an informed decision. Similarly, if research comes up with a new way of working or something brand new, standards gives us a great way to get it out there to industry. With safety as well, or the GB rail is the safest, one of the safest in the world, and consistently one of the safest in Europe. That a lot of that is because of the safety systems that we have, and they're continuously evolving and being improved upon. And the seedbed for that is in research. So a lot of new items that are coming through, whether it's health and well-being monitoring, that all comes through research and then is implemented through the safety system. Similarly, when we go to do research, we won't need to know what the value is, what the benefit could be. And we get a lot of that safety data of occurrences and incidents through safety. So they all work together in RSSB and they create unique products. So let's have a look at what that is. And again, funded by the DFT, which is important to remember. So on a talk like today, people think research. Okay, I've got an idea for what that is. And you might be going, I think in the title they mentioned development as well. What is the development part? And then if that's what that is, then what is innovation? Well, innovation is the really cool things that get developed. That is things like the very light rail vehicle there, or this steering bogie by SET. And these were developed through the RSSB innovation program. Innovation is good ideas implemented any which way, as long as you get them out there. Invention, creation, development, stealing from other industries and deploying. Research, on the other hand, is all about, well, we're going to get into it a bit more, but it's providing the answers or discovering the implications of things. That can lead to the innovation, and we do cross boundaries a lot. Development tends to be if somebody says, this product could make a big difference in industry. Now, creating the product through cycles of work is more the development side. So of course, if you want to deploy a change, and if it's a product-based change, you would have to research it to discover the principles that make it good, and then you would have to develop it into a product. And then the deployment of that could be an innovation for any particular company. So RSSB innovation, though, We're a problem solver. When industry comes across something that they're just frustrated by but don't know how to move on, we're a gap filler. Maybe where technology is advancing, but the railway doesn't quite know how to fit it in. We're a mediator as well, because there's so many different parties. PWA and track based and track focused, you might go, wouldn't it be great to have all those measurements from the train? Which the train is run by a train operating company, which is completely separate to you. How do you encourage them to provide you with that data? RSSB can be the mediator. The integrator as well. The supply chain can come up with new products and great advancements, but for rail to deploy them, quite often there's open questions about what does this mean, or if we shift to this, we're neglecting that. Perhaps you're putting monitoring on axle bearings and you're thinking about removing some exams. Are you capable of understanding what that risk is, what you're giving up? It seems to be the right thing to do, but research can help you to set out that case and get an industry position on it, which supports you. We look into the future and we try to unlock what's needed to improve the railway. And we do that for all of these stakeholders. It is really about safe and efficient and new knowledge solutions. So let's have a look at what we do for RSSB. When the DFT funds it, it comes with a remit. I always include this. It seems a bit boring. Who wants to talk about a remit? But it explains a lot about the type of products that we do, because I can't present today and show you super cool stuff that we've done, because quite often what the solutions that we develop are very important for industry, but not always super cool. And why not? I know what it's like to be in a company and you know what the problem is. You know that if you can get it solved now, it will save you money or eliminate a big risk for you. But the RSSB is asked, and that's this red square in the bottom left, not to go into the area where it's an incremental change that can be done by a single player. Because if a company can do that, they should be motivated and have the ability to do it themselves. They must develop that. That's a core to what they need to do. If RSSB steps in and tries to get involved there, we're going to muddy the waters. We're not actually going to end up helping. So if it's a problem that you can fix and it's to do with you, you need to fix it. And the DFT asks us to stay out of that. Instead, we put our time and resources into those problems that require an awful lot of coordination, multiple players, multiple companies, complex issues, that mediation. We also do a lot around the blue sky thinking, those ones that aren't as immediate. People aren't sure what it would mean for rail. And so we can explore that through a research project and then report back to everybody and give them that advice. Similarly, we're not tied down to make sure everything is about tangible or intangible benefits. There are tangible benefits. Intangible benefits means you can't put a pound sign on it. You know it's good, but it's very difficult to explain why, or perhaps they're soft benefits. So we're very happy to explore that. Our partners and delivery teams can add those values to it through different methods and really show people that actually we don't quite know where the value is exactly in this, but it is valuable. And we work in the long time lag. We can go beyond control periods and beyond TOC franchise agreements. So looking at those solutions that industry will need. And there's plenty of examples of that, whether it's climate change and a project called Tracker that was done very early on, which highlighted what the issues coming down the road were and what the industry will need to do to step up. And that was there waiting when actually industry mobilized and gave them a great footing for it. So here's a crazy map of the type of things we do. Remember, it's all around interfaces. It is optimization, exploitation. It covers topics of efficient, safe, sustainable. Um, it covers everything. One part of the day, I can be discussing things like seat comfort and seat design. The next one, you're talking about decarbonization, then wheel profiles, rail steels, low adhesion, freight wheel flats, all in a day. So the whole team covers all of these topics. We divide things out into professional leads. We never claim to be the experts, but what we do is have that industry-wide view. And so we can see that position, see the value, and then pull together the people who are needed to deliver that. Let's have a look at what it's like. So the RSSB research program is open. Anybody can make a suggestion. You don't have to be a member of the RSSB. You don't have to be from rail. So you submit a research idea. And we've got a team of analysts within the research team, and they examine the ideas and pull together key people from industry to do a first pass test. Then we look at whether this is actually something that we should build up into a case. To do that, we have to look for a specification for the research, because delivery of the research quite most of the time happens externally. We use consultants, um, suppliers, a whole range of different mechanisms, which we'll cover in a second, to deliver the research. So a really good specification. What are we asking for? What do we want them to do? And what is the type of supplier we need to be able to give us that? We don't always get what we want. That goes out to tender, and we pick the best that we can. It is all managed, controlled, budgeted. Every single project, there is a business case that goes behind it. We don't know what's going to be created at the end, but we can predict what it's likely to be and know that there's enough value there that it warrants the research. And then we go into delivery. And research delivery can span multi-year projects or can be quick turnaround. We have a project management team who will take that concept, monitor the supplier, make sure that everything's going well. We have project steering groups, which are really important to make sure it delivers something tangible for industry rather than something that the RSSB thinks is useful. And at the end of it, we get out our research findings. But we don't stop there, and I'm going to cover that in a second. We really focus on implementation. And throughout this, there's loads of opportunities for people to get involved, and it's a really good thing to consider. So you within your areas, you can propose new research. You can become the sponsor, the person who says, yes, this is a good project and we should do it for these reasons, that voice for the research and the custodian of it as it goes through. You can also join a project steering group, and that is the one that ensures that the supplier that's creating the new research is actually delivering what you need in a format that you want it. And we get great benefit from that because it improves the likelihood that we deliver something useful, which is what we want. So delivery mechanisms. Research has got different ways of getting results. And we've developed a few, we run them in tandem, and we pick the best ones for the best project. So sometimes we do direct procurement, or most of the time, and that'll be your T number type research projects. If you're familiar with the RSSB, you'll know that we're always chucking around coded numbers which refer back to projects, often because our titles are so obscure. People go for accuracy in the description rather than making it memorable. Sometimes things are internally delivered. The RSSB has got specialist skills, such as the human factors team. And then we do something strange called a research call or a research competition. And you might have heard these terms and been confused by it. A research call is where you know you have a problem, but you don't know what the solution looks like. And so what the call does is just defines the problem really well, provides all the supporting information that's there, and asks people for a variety of solutions. The best of those are picked, and we put multiple horses in the same race. Everybody gets funded to develop their solutions, and at the end we appraise them and we see which ones are likely to move on, go forward, or industry themselves keep an eye on it and then latch on to which solutions look the most promising and develop them. So it's about priming things, giving it a kickstart. They're also called competitions, and if you enter a research competition, all you do is pitch for what your proposal will be, and then you win the opportunity to do the work that you described. You don't actually get a trophy, prize, or any sort of award. The other one is a grant mechanism, and this is useful. This is where we go in together. We invest some money into the development of it. Quite often happens that a supplier and an operator or an infrastructure manager has got a good idea, but at that time they don't exactly have all the funds they need to be able to do it. So they can do some, but not everything. So then you go around to other research organizations and you say, well, we have this idea, we're going ahead with it. We'd like to go ahead with it. If you come in on us, we can do that. And all the RSSB asks is that if you're willing to share what the findings are with the rest of industry, because we want to get that new knowledge out there. The fact that we haven't delivered it or organized everything around it is irrelevant. If those findings come out and are shared, then we're willing to go in. And we also do partnerships. Some of our partners are listed there, including the University of Huddersfield, Sheffield and Leeds. And these you can sort of think of as a call-off of a framework agreement. So if we commit that we're going to do research with these teams, and with that certainty around multi-year funding and projects coming through their pipeline, it means they can invest in equipment, facilities, staff retention, and they can also then benefit us because we do consistent research with them. And that means that if we've got something that we want to go and falls into their territory, we can get up and running very quickly. So whilst I'm going on about research, and we might touch on some examples in a minute, you might want to go, well, where do I find this and how is it? The main place to go is the RSSB research catalog. So you can put in search terms there and discover what's there that's relevant for you. So we've recently had one on track design and curving, and lateral track design. We also have one previously done on vertical track design, which gives you the basis for you to be able to alter what your build-up is and based on your design requirements, rather than sticking to the rules of thumb. So the research catalog is a main place. We also run another website called sparkrail.org. Sparkrail is an international repository for rail research. So when you ask that question, surely somebody else has solved this, or what do they do in this country? Have a search for it in there. Other people have quite often come up against the same problem, and their research is published, or at least a teaser to it, so that you can get in contact with them. And anything that you're interested in, you can contact the RSSB team, and we can link you up, because we also have academic and international partnerships. So then there's this document, which gets published each quarter. This is the research highlights document, and it covers some of the most important things to keep you up to date, such as who's using what, and also to encourage you, if it's applicable, to take it on. The research that's ready to be used for first users, what's in progress, make sure nobody else funds the same thing or gets surprised by an output. Some of the research we do does change how elements of people's roles work. And so not catching them off guard is a key element of that. And we can't reach everyone all the time, so it is important to keep an eye. Also, there's opportunities to get involved, like we mentioned. And on here, there might be people within the supply chain community or consultancy, and there are always opportunities to work on the program research. So you can use the link there to see what our current tenders are. And on the back of this document, there is a upcoming pipeline of our research. So during COVID, the supply chain said, look, this is difficult for us. We're not sure if we're going to have to furlough people. What have you got coming up? And so we decided to tell people what was sort of forming very loose in the pipeline, just so that they understand if there's applicable items coming up for them. And also, again, to prevent that duplication of work. So a really useful document, and sign up. The slides will be going out after this, so use it. We're not the only ones who do research. And what's nice about this is that we can say we work with all of these other organizations or groups that do it. There's different quirks about each different research group, what drives them, how they're funded, what their traits are. But Network Rail, as a key infrastructure manager, they own their own standards to do it, infrastructure. They have got a research program. They know where they need to find improvements and advancements, and they've got their challenge statements out there as well. And they have to develop items from concept, or pick them up and adapt them to UK rail infrastructure and get them deployed. So they go right through the TRL levels. TRL means technology readiness level. It's an easy way to measure, I think, from 1 to 9 of, your early stage. It's a concept. There's something in this. It works in the lab. I can roughly demonstrate it to you. Then you get into your demonstration level, which is when you take it out of that, sticky tape and wires hanging out of it, and you try and put it into the environment and you test that it works there consistently. And then you'd start to productize it, building on its robustness and its ability to run for a period of time. That's just the progression of technology items as it goes through. First of a kind through Innovate UK. That sort of helps those ones that are already created, but they can't get into rail. It is difficult to navigate rail. We know that in RSSB. We try to implement a lot of change, and we try to support people who are bringing in changes as well. You've got research councils. The UK is betting on a knowledge-based economy. There is funding available. There is a lot of investment and a lot of really good organizations to help innovators to develop their concepts and products and apply science, and then hopefully apply it in the UK, but also sell it internationally. And there's cases that we do it and see in rail where people bypass the UK market entirely just because it's not the right time or the right place, but can successfully use these mechanisms to develop great products, sell them internationally, but bring back cash into the country. So it's a good investment, and we hope it continues. And you've also got the Catapult, and the Catapult provides innovation as a service to public service bodies or to the nation. So it runs technology demonstrators. It can start with really low TRL levels, but each one, different people experiment up different levels of the scale and apply them. At RSSB, I think one of the unique things that we bring, despite where we sit in industry, is our focus on implementation. We deliver research from an idea and we publish it, but actually what's really key about it is not just the publication, but the communication of it, letting people know that it's out there. We need to reach all of those stakeholders. And today, if I ask people in the call to raise their hand, if they've used a piece of RSSB research, if they've ever come across it, there will be a good portion who haven't. And we have to do a lot more to make sure that we reduce that. But after publication, in universities and things like that, people tend to look for what they call impact, but they also tend to look for publication and citation. We don't care about the publication stage other than getting it into the hands of the people. We don't mind about citation at all. We are just about getting results. When we get results, research is research. You never know what you're going to get at the end. Sometimes it can be a bit hit or miss, and a portion of our research doesn't land on the mark. But if it is significant, if it does stand to make a change to industry, we then monitor how it's being taken up. We check it from its planning stage as people know about it and then think about how they're going to apply it to our first users, our early adopters. And then we're pushing constantly, reminding other people of what benefit has been gained by this company by applying it and encouraging others, taking it from advanced all the way to full, where we come along and we ask people, how did you get on with applying something like vetism? Oh, okay. Well, what do you mean vetism? That's an RSSB product of research. Oh, okay. Didn't know that. That was just an industry system. No. So we get eventually to the point where people don't know it came from research, don't know that applying it special or that anybody's even interested in it. It's just BAU. And that is actually, while unfortunately it's boring for people, it's incredibly valuable for us as a research group. So we monitor the research on how far they go so that we know how to intervene and help them go further. And we're not afraid to revisit research that has been published. If we find out from industry and get that feedback that, do you know what would be great if you actually ran that up to 75 miles an hour instead of 70? That would mean we could apply it in so many more cases. Then we will call back up the supplier and go again and revise that. Remember, we want it used. And we have to motivate industry change. So here's a quick look at some of the structures that we do to do that. We provide new insight. And the example here is a digital automatic coupler, which was a new proposal coming into freight that people were caught on the hop with. Again, trying to make that change in industry, business cases are really valuable. And so quite often we will do the research that says, yes, this is a good technology. And as a bonus and to help you take the next step, here's a business case that you can use to justify making your case internally or the industry case and starting that discussion. I think many people in the team come from a railway background and we still enjoy getting out there and getting hands-on and doing it. And you learn so much from applying things and get that direct feedback as to what it will be like in the real world. So pilots and case studies both help move things on, prove that they can be done, but they also give great exposure and inform us about how we need to develop solutions more so that people can take them up easily. We know that in industry, day jobs are super busy. And that quite often people want something that they can apply quickly, easily, with little headache. Tools and models are a great way to do that. So if you come up with apply a new concept, well, putting it into a model is a great way to encourage people to use it and make it easy for them to take you through that journey. And then we also look at standards and putting change in there. We'll focus on that in a second. So normally when you create research, you've got a problem because you've created new knowledge and you have to figure out who it's useful for. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you publish it and go, well, if they search it, they might find it. But if you seek them out, you do better. So there's a population that can use it. And you've got a subpopulation of those who actually hear about it, who understand what you've created, what you're proposing. Many times people hear about things, but how many of them consider actually using it and take steps and really investigate it and read the full thing? So that reduces it again. And then we get into those who take action to implement it. Now that's at the start. The more people who implement it, you get case studies, you can encourage use, they discover all the problems. We will help people actually in that application. We've got a funding pot where we do implementation facilitation, and it's going along with that early adopter, hand in hand with them to apply it, discover that learning and improve the guidance for others to follow it. But another great mechanism to make change is the standards model. So when we get research included into the standards, one, it's a central location where any professional working in that area will come across at a time. And then it gives us that reference. So we increase the number of people who hear about it and the relevant people who hear about it. Now, the standards don't let us put standards teams don't let us put anything in there, and the standards committees do check it. They check it well and they cross-check the research to make sure it's true, is beneficial before they include it. So if we get it in there, then it's an endorsement that this works, that everybody can rely on. And then sometimes for the right projects, you get the fact that it is advised people should do it or it's agreed. And then you get a step towards industry compliance and usage, which is a much different way to approach it than that. So RSSB, we use our unique position, having that standards capability within the organization, and we really maximize that. So I mentioned implementation, but it's easy to talk about it. But here's some of the figures that we get. So in the last 10 years of data, we've completed over 389 research projects. Now, I said not all of them make a difference. Some of them come out with, that's interesting, or for a particular group, that's relevant to them, but not for everybody. It's not going to change the railway. But the significant projects, they can. And we end up with about 58% of our research is significant outputs. Eventually, they can drift off. The research becomes old, industry no longer has the issue, or it's fully implemented and we don't monitor anymore. That's that black section. So right now, on the tip of our team's tongue will be 104 projects that we know are sitting there that we need to push further with implementation. We've got all of them on our mind, and when we meet people and engage with industry, we're ready to point them towards those examples, encourage them to take it up, and we keep an eye on who is using it and who we want to use it and keep pushing. That pushing gets us through that staged process from planning to initial to advanced use and full. And it's really good to see that 19% of our research ends up fully implemented or embedded into industry. 69% is used in creating value for somebody. Both seeing that, but also demonstrating the value of it is really important. Sometimes people ask about what does it mean for benefits value? What's the pound sign that comes out as a result of that? We think it's much more calculating that benefit in monetary benefit is really difficult. It takes a lot of resource. Everybody will apply something somewhat different. People sharing their numbers and figures is very difficult to encourage them to do so. Wherever we get it, we include it in case studies. But focusing on the use and the extraction of value is the best way to go. So we do that. So I'm going to move into examples in a minute and explore freight a bit with you for a little bit. But to sort of summarize this section, there's loads of useful knowledge. Go search on the RSSB catalog or Spark. If you've been sat on something, why not propose it? Really good research proposals create great research. That's what we want to see. We get to see who's doing what in industry. We get that view across the field. So if you're looking to try something new or develop something, come and ask us. See if somebody else is doing it already, or if it's unique, and then maybe we can work out what research around that would look like. For any of the suppliers on the call, there is a chance to get involved and to be the supplier for us. Grant funding is another one. Development opportunities for you and your team, getting involved in steering groups and sponsorship, and you can always pick up the phone to us. An ask back is that if you're using RSSB research, you found it useful, or you've got any feedback, is drop us a line to that inbox or to my email address and let us know. That feedback from industry is a weak signal. We listen out for it. We always ask. But when we get news of things being put in place, it is so valuable to us, and it makes that case for continued funding. And don't forget to check out the highlights document. So I wanted to include an example and a PWI related example. And that example sorts to sit in freight, but we'll get there in a roundabout way. So freight sometimes can be a little bit forgotten. As you can see here, as a rail wagons are coming through and nobody's looking up from their phone at all, even though this thing is trundling right in front of them. So the network in the UK, of course, much larger, then trimmed down over time. The passenger network looks like this. And here we go with a little look about the freight network. So this is slightly older data, but you can see there's some clear main routes. You can see most of them start along the coast and then crisscross through the country and go to other ports, key facilities. But they actually go from different things like quarries to centres to inland ports. Is about moving around all those bulk goods. Now, a simplified version there of the freight network. So let's look at what freight is like in GB. And hopefully there's somebody here from freight on the call. And you can bail me out if I get stuck along the way. Let's have a little summary of what happens in rail freight in GB. Mainly what they're pulling is going to be your intermodal, that's your shipping containers, and also construction aggregate. You can see that they are the main ones, but there's some really cool products and things that get moved around elsewhere, such as metals or sheet metal, finished products such as cars and vehicles, biomass such as the Drax units, and other minerals such as things like China clay and niche products that come from parts of the UK where rail matches and people can move it easily by rail. Freight, though, in terms of passenger numbers and train movements, is a fraction of what is passenger. Let's say 10%. 10% becomes a good way to think about rail freight in the UK. So there's a more simplified version of what freight moves. So remember, domestic intermodal, shipping containers, construction is your aggregate and stone, cement products. I will have to come back to that comment. The units is movements, train movements, journeys, but not passenger journeys. So there's some differences. Okay, and then when we look at freight as a mode of moving larger goods, we can see that rail is a smaller portion. Somebody once had uh, a great piece of wisdom for me. They went, rail is the third most efficient mode of moving goods. Number one is a pipeline. Number two is water. Number three is rail. So water remains an important part of moving goods around the UK, but you can see the flexibility that and ubiquitousness that roads have is absolutely massive. Rail is really important, and we're going to get onto what rail freight can look like. The two measures, one is about what you lift, the tonnage, and one is about how the distance that is then moved. So they give slightly different values. And apologies, there are lots of rail people operating in GB, smaller companies, freight handlers, logistics companies. But let's just have a look at some of the key operators that you might recognize. And if your train isn't on the slide, my apologies. I do know that you're there. They're all listed in my notes. So when we look at market share, the size of each train roughly represents market share. Now, each quarter, the position of those three big ones swaps a little bit. They're all in competition, and freight is private. Freight pays to go on the railway, but they are all private companies. So they are out there to win those contracts, to grow, and to make a profit. Between those three, they cover 90% of what's done. So if you remember anything, it is those top three companies: Freightliner, GB Rail Freight, and Deutsche Bahn, DB Cargo. And then other ones are interesting because you've got people like direct rail services, and their main job is to move nuclear flasks around and to be that necessary hauler from nuclear items on behalf of the government. That's who the contract's with. That's their main goal. They are there to do that. They will not disappear. But when they're not doing that, they should be making efficient use of their assets. So they do move other goods. Similarly with Colas. Colas is the contract to support Network Rail on possessions and major works. But midweek, maybe some of those assets aren't quite as busy. And so they move things to support that and support the business and make it more profitable. And then people like Rail Operations Group, who do a lot of empty stock moves and also move freight, in particular intermodal around. You've got other people like DC Rail, who are a smaller aggregate company, and you've got really interesting ones like Victor Rail Freight, who are looking at parcel services. So there's always something happening in this market. I'm having a look at my time here, and I know I'm chatting away, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit. The main message from this is that actually freight does have risks. There are a number of things to be worked on, but overall, things are pretty good and pretty safe and in control. And you can read up more about it in the annual health and safety report. It also gives you a good idea about what freight needs and where the market is going. And RSSB have done an awful lot of work on freight, and it sort of falls into these sections of supporting them to run faster. That one about derailment prevention. How do we stop those issues from happening? And when you see individual topics, you may not see how they map into the main ones. A lot of RSSB core work around staff and improving staff well-being, staff management, safety communications, they're all relevant to freight. And we want to help them make their operation more efficient by allowing them to carry more, either longer, heavier, or bigger items. And we package a lot of that into a research program, which is when we group the projects together under teams so that we can engage with people with a clean set of solutions, and they can get involved and they can easily keep up to date with progress. So we've got a freight research program on at the moment. It covers those things like heavier, longer, larger freight. That average speed. The average speed of a freight train from origin to destination is around 30 miles an hour. Up below or above that, it is what you get, whilst the maximum speed they can run at is 75 miles an hour, but they don't often get to do that. Then you've got maintenance and safety, and then low carbon. And speaking about carbon, time to have a little think about what the future for freight could be. Is it about growth or decline? Is rail freight about to become the next canal? And you can see that goods are still transported by canal. Is it going to grow or not? Well, actually, rail freight is really good. It is super efficient. It has some natural efficiencies built into it. So it can move an awful lot for relatively low emissions. It is expensive investment into these assets, so that makes it very difficult to change. It's private and competitive. Margins can be tight. The assets on the network will be more vulnerable to the effects of climate change, especially for freight, because they're the heaviest one. That's the example I'm going to briefly touch on. There, it's full of conscientious and passionate people, much like the PWI. Everybody who's involved really likes it. It's not often that it's just a job for people. They have an aspiration for growth. But rail has to work to its strengths. You saw that market share. It's about picking those products, those routes, those runs that can be profitable, but also exploring new ones. And in terms of growth or decline, well, we can have a look at what's been stipulated in the next control period. Scotland themselves are targeting 8.7% growth in rail freight. In Wales and England, 7.5%. And Great British Railways have been engaging with industry on setting a growth target also. If we look here briefly at emissions, you can see that whilst rail freight now is carbon efficient compared to road, only about 40% of the network is electrified. And electrification will, the carbon emissions from electrification are going to improve up into as we progress towards 2050 targets. But if road makes those dramatic changes, then the case for rail freight as a low carbon mode of transport, if we don't shift it along and transition to greener fuels other than just diesel, our natural efficiencies of steel on steel transport won't get us all the way there. So it's something that rail freight really has to look at. Electrification would be an awesome solution, but it's an expensive solution, and the political want to do it isn't there right now. I think the whole of the rail industry has to push and make sure everybody realizes that for rail to remain relevant, that we must get these solutions in place. If we can find the investment to do it now, what investment case would there be in 2050? And you can see here how running on diesel alone, as things change over the next decades, how acceptable will it be? Will it really look like a climate hero when you look at the emissions? A really quick graph just to put that into context as well when we think about hydrogen or battery. Battery is more energy dense but takes longer to charge. Hydrogen is less developed in terms of its solutions. When we look at the impact of rail freight, the top units there are intermodal shipping containers, usually more of a bulky, less dense formation. That's why they're longer. They reach a limit based on length before they reach a limit based on weight. And if we looked at what a bimod would look like, a train there, how many batteries would you have to add? There are those yellow items in a tender behind. You cannot fit this on a loco. We need the development of new solutions. We need electrification infill. We need to watch battery technology, look how its density is happening. And then things like regenerative braking. Actually, that is only a tiny contribution if you can only get that energy in the loco itself. If you can distribute power, which people are working on now, down the formation, you can change that and you can recover a lot more energy. And then as we get to aggregates, which are much heavier and a bigger challenge to haul, then you look at the number of battery units that you're going to require to complete these journeys. And then you think about the feasibility of shunting them in yards. And really now is the time that the industry has to be able to think about it. Absolutely. Different speeds make a difference. I see in the chat a question there about speeds. Um, we are also examining what increased speeds could look like for lighter loads or in the intermodal. As loco capability becomes stronger and running under the wires and things like that, it might be possible. And so we don't want to have the 75-mile-an-hour limit as an empirical thing. So if we look quickly at the heavy axle weight infrastructure model, we'll see sort of how research can be applied. This gives you some background to it, but in short, the really heavy wagons that run are limited by their axle weight. And Network Rail need to do that so they don't trash their asset as freight runs over it. So you say, this is a good route, we've it well maintained, all the assets are strong, no super weak bridges, you can run through here. But actually, that gets declined and it's difficult to invest and maintain the asset availability at those levels, the RA9 and RA10. Freight finds that difficult because they can still run, but they run on a dispensation that is time bound and it can be withdrawn at any time. But when you're signing a contract thinking you can fit so many wagons of these goods, you know that actually you need that to continue. And if it's withdrawn, you will make a loss. So they asked us to have a look at what we could do. And our first one was to examine the different asset types and see how vulnerable they are to having those route availability bans revoked or removed. So we looked at plain line and examined what could happen with rail freight there, how sensitive it is to it. Embankments, and here's the landslip at Hook. And we have to think how this will increase as the climate changes as well, and our vulnerability to that. As I say, freight is one of the heaviest, hardest things to go over the line, and it can often flush things out. We've also got our cuttings. And here, I'm living in Rochester in Kent, and so we've got an awful lot of chalk cuttings, and they can be vulnerable. You've got masonry arches and retaining walls, including this classic one on the approach to Victoria. You've got metallic bridges, you've got concrete bridges and bridge piers, you've got concrete bridge decks. They all react differently, and they can all impact the weight that's allowed on it. So what the project did was look at these different ones and examined where they're at risk and where there's a lack of knowledge, and making the case for doing more research and creating a model maybe that can help industry understand this better, both Network Rail and the freight operators. So some of the key ones were, of course, plain line track, the earthworks, and the metallic bridges. And the metallic bridge is an interesting one because some of these are so old that they're not made out of standard construction materials. They are historic. It's very difficult for the civil engineers to be able to access them for inspection and to appraise them. There's a lot of unknowns within that. So the ways that it can happen is that actually the freight is the thing that flushes out the weak point. Everybody else might be running over it over time, or time itself taking its toll. And then you send that big heavy freight train over, and that's the one that triggers collapse. Everyone looks at freight and goes, what have you done? The other one is that actual heavy weight does contribute to the degradation. And we've been learning more and more about this, and the project is underway. But if we look at it, it goes from a scale of easy to complex, but industry is going to need these answers. It's going to need them to know where to invest, and it's going to need to know how to plan for rail freight. Whilst you saw that there's plans for growth targets, but what's the basis to believe that that's possible? It's things like this that do it, and things like this that direct the investment. So the decline can be governed by just time passing, not about the passage of vehicles. It can just be things like corrosion. It can be where the passage of it is implementing it, and it can be multifaceted, where it's time, passage of trains, passenger trains. So what we wanted to know was instead, oh yeah, this is the dispensation form, and it gives you the restrictions that you need if you want to go on these different routes. However, the asset engineers informed the team who own this that actually this bridge, people need to, we're going to mitigate that, we're going to slow things down. Freight is limited in its speed as it crosses. And if you take that route, you must follow those rules. However, it's not a full cycle. Those people who set those results don't often get to see what trains went over the asset. They don't get the full picture of what the traffic is. So we think that there's great scope here in the work that's been undertaken to create a route representation from A to B, apply a sort of a countdown, which can be approximate to start with and then improve over time of that asset availability. How long before it moves down to the next mitigation, and what is that next mitigation likely to be? Stopping people from getting caught on the hop. Display an indication that confidence value and allow people to drill down, whether they want to challenge it or understand it better, or as information improves, then it can be updated. And then people who are planning this. So if you've got to invest in certain assets, and what you put into one will be taken from another. But playing out traffic scenarios, what's the best use of it? Heavy axle weight, running more of it will increase maintenance costs. But is that good? Does that get recovered? Is it better for the economy as a whole? How do we invest in those assets? And then how can the freight operators themselves benefit from it? So all of that is outside of like the asset management planning. This is new, and freight certainly don't get these details in that Network Rail consider communicated fully to them to make their informed business decisions. So this is the project that we're doing with Southampton, and funded by Network Rail to develop a minimum viable product that will hope to create this. It involves different stages of research because the degradation curves aren't fully understood. So that's one section. The role of RCM and being able to monitor it and to interpolate from that is another section. Pulling together all that information that people have in their heads and putting it into a system that lets people use it as a tool is also a lot of research and development. So it can get very involved, very complicated, but ultimately very valuable. This project now is in the about creating the minimal viable product. Co-funded by Network Rail. So a small piece of research by the RSSB can state the case and the value that's in there and attract much greater funding from Network Rail and work together to deliver it with competent people like the University of Southampton. There's always a yin and yang pull here, just as I finish off. So if Southampton are the delivery team, there's a balance that has to be struck, and RSSB are the client on behalf of industry. So sometimes that team wants to create new knowledge. They want to build a portfolio of work. They want to limit the unknowns. They don't want to have that liability. Their natural stance is, oh, well, if I don't know that, let me find out the real answer and dive into it, which can take an awful long time. And they want to work on something interesting. And we have to think about getting something delivered in a timely fashion that doesn't cost the world and actually can be applied. So we want to deliver something useful. We want to make it usable for the users. It needs to be robust because industry might come to rely on it. And we need to ensure that it's built in a way that as further research happens in time, we can build on it and further improve it. And that, in a way, is sort of the role of research and the job that we take. It's a slightly different level. We're not always technical experts. It's really useful what RSSB do. We solve a lot of problems for industry. So, and if you've got any suggestions, give me a shout. And remember, as I said, the team are never full on experts. And I can see in the chat there's some great discussion happening there about particulars. We are constantly learning, we're constantly picking up on new topics. But what we do is openly bring together people and the true experts, get them to work together, agree on what's going to be useful, and give it a go. Hopefully, we create solutions that work, and we've got a good track record of doing so. I was going to do another example, but out of time, I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to close it there.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very wide-ranging talk around the subject of how R&D can help. So can I also add to it that I'm personally involved with some RSSB projects and through the Vehicle Track Technical Advisory Group. And I must admit, having got involved in some of these projects, it is really interesting. And it's a really good chance to meet other people in the industry with perhaps somewhat different views to the problems. So I would engage, I would actually advocate everyone getting involved with this. It's and the strength of the research comes out of a wide body of people representing lots of ideas and views working together, and that's its strength. So, did you got a good example? Somebody's asked, Stuart's asking, you've got a good example of stuff research turning up something that was a bad idea?
Oh, yeah, there's sensitivity sometimes. Yeah, we try not to deploy the bad ideas, but sometimes you do discover things like we might have to work on something like track access charges and track access charges for freight. And sometimes what people think is that they're paying the exact amount of value that their damage does, but there can be other political parts in it as well. And so ultimately, you might say that actually, whilst it's expensive in your business, you might be getting a bit of a bargain right now. So I wouldn't rock that boat too much. So in the background, sometimes we have to mention subtle things. Sometimes as well, when we try to help, because a project might start off in the safety sphere of, say, offset loading within shipping containers, where they're loaded too much to one side or too much to the front, which adds to derailment risk, especially when it comes along a track feature like a twist fault. And so whilst we're trying to limit derailments for freight, what the research comes up with is that actually you have to monitor much more closely, and we've got to bring in those tolerances more. So whilst we're trying to help them, we've inadvertently created more activities for them, and they don't always thank you for that. Somebody will, because we all know that a major derailment could have catastrophic effects on their entire business. But it is research. We do have to remind people you won't always discover exactly what you want. If it was, we wouldn't be undertaking the work.
Amen to that. Got a question. Is there an opportunity to reduce the time it takes for research to be done and items implemented so the railway can be more adaptive and responsive?
Yeah, the amount of time is difficult and tricky. Some projects are just complex, and we mentioned that a little bit there in the want of the suppliers and others. We've also got that one of coordinating industry and the different views. Quite often in RSSB research, those complicated ones we get landed with, the collaboration ones, is somebody loses out, and we've got to try and balance that. And that mediation can take a long time. There are examples of fast done research. There was one on coupler strengths for freight that had a turnaround time of, I think, less than 6 months from when we thought, okay, there might be something in this to look at, whether they're actually stronger than they're listed as, or different ways to increase the length of the formation. And that returned great results really quickly. Now we're still working on that because we've got the results, and it can be done through a mechanism with Network Rail and the service review, but we want to integrate it into the load books and into the system. So that continues. We're always on the lookout to do it. We can't shy away from those projects that will take longer because nobody else will do them. So we do take them on, but we do know that pace is something. And in terms of implementation, our team is putting tons of effort in to predicting what the outputs are going to be, making sure that when the research is completed, it's in a shape that people can use and take on. There is improvement there, and sometimes we're surprised actually by what people's expectations are as a good output versus what industry actually needs. So there is improvement required. Yeah.
So I've got another question in from Jacob C. If we wanted to talk to you about the work on high axle load freight, e.g. due to doing some complementary research, who would be the best person to approach? I imagine you're probably a good starting point.
You can always use me as a starting point. You can use me as a starting point for any of the topics here, because we work as a team and then we distribute it out. So alongside myself working on the freight program, the key lead is Aaron Barrett, and then below that we have an analyst, Andy Zhang, and he's the one working hand in hand with Southampton to keep an eye on this delivery. But use me, my email address. I have it here. I'll pop it into the chat, and then we'll get you in touch. Yeah.
Right. Well, we're virtually out of time, I'm afraid. So can I ask you all to, before I close the meeting, can I ask you to unmute yourselves and thank Robert in the usual way?
Thank you.
A few virtual claps as well. So thank you very much indeed, Robert, for that. That was a fascinating insight. As ever with these things, this talk has been recorded and will be available in due course through the PWI's website and that. So thank you again, Robert, and thank you for all those of you who took the time to join in today.